Dr. Bull smiled again, but continued to gaze on them without speaking. The professor resumed, a pause before each weary word. Please do not think me excessively abrupt, but I advise you to alter those plans, or if it is too late for that, to follow your agent with all the support you can get for him. Comrade Syme and I have had an experience which it would take more time to recount than we can afford, if we are to act on it. I will, however, relate the occurrence in detail, even at the risk of losing time, if you really feel that it is essential to the understanding of the problem we have to discuss. He was spinning out his sentences, making them intolerably long and lingering in the hope of maddening the practical little doctor into an explosion of impatience which might show his hand. But the little doctor continued only to stare and smile, and the monologue was uphill work. Syme began to feel a new sickness and despair. The doctor's smile and silence were not at all like the cataleptic stare and horrible silence which he had confronted in the professor half an hour before. About the professor's makeup and all his antics, there was always something merely grotesque, like a gollywog. Syme remembered those wild woes of yesterday as one remembers being afraid of a bogey in childhood. But here was daylight. Here was a healthy, square-shouldered man in tweeds, not odd save for the accident of his ugly spectacles, not glaring or grinning at all, but smiling steadily and not saying a word. The whole had a sense of unbearable reality. Under the increasing sunlight, the colors of the doctor's complexion, the pattern of his tweeds, grew and expanded outrageously, as such things grow too important in a realistic novel. But his smile was quite slight, the pose of his head polite. The only uncanny thing was his silence. As I say, resumed the professor like a man toiling through heavy sand, the incident that has occurred to us and has led us to ask for information about the Marquise is one which you may think it better to have narrated, but as it came in the way of Comrade Syme rather than me. His words he seemed to be dragging out like words in an anthem, but Syme, who was watching, saw his long fingers rattle quickly on the edge of the crazy table. He read the message. You must go on. This devil has sucked me dry. Syme plunged into the breach with that bravado of improvisation which always came to him when he was alarmed. Yes, the thing really happened to me, he said hastily. I had the good fortune to fall into conversation with a detective who took me, thanks to my hat, for a respectable person. Wishing to clinch my reputation for respectability, I took him and made him very drunk at the Savoy. Under this influence, he became friendly and told me in so many words that within a day or two they hoped to arrest the Marquise in France. So unless you or I can get on his track, the doctor was still smiling in the most friendly way, and his protected eyes were still impenetrable. The professor signaled to Syme that he would resume his explanation, and he began again with the same elaborate calm. Syme immediately brought this information to me, and we came here together to see what use you would be inclined to make of it. It seems to me unquestionably urgent that all this time Syme had been staring at the doctor almost as steadily as the doctor stared at the professor, but quite without the smile. The nerves of both comrades in arms were near snapping under that strain of motionless amiability when Syme suddenly leant forward and idly tapped the edge of the table. His message to his ally ran, I have an intuition. The professor, with scarcely a pause in his monologue, signaled back. Then sit on it. Syme telegraphed, it is quite extraordinary. The other answered, extraordinary rot. Syme said, I am a poet. The other retorted, you are a dead man. Syme had gone quite red up to his yellow hair, and his eyes were burning feverishly as he said he had an intuition, and it had risen to a sort of light-headed certainty. Resuming his symbolic taps, he signaled to his friend. You scarcely realize how poetic my intuition is. It has that sudden quality we sometimes feel in the coming of spring. He then studied the answer on his friend's fingers. The answer was, go to hell. The professor then resumed his merely verbal monologue addressed to the doctor. Perhaps I should rather say, said Syme on his fingers, that it resembles that sudden smell of the sea which may be found in the heart of lush woods. His companion disdained to reply. Or yet again, tapped Syme, it is positive, as is the passionate red hair of a beautiful woman. The professor was continuing his speech, but in the middle of it, Syme decided to act. He leaned across the table and said in a voice that could not be neglected, Dr. Bull. The doctor's sleek and smiling head did not move, but they could have sworn that under his dark glasses his eyes darted towards Syme. Dr. Bull, said Syme in a voice peculiarly precise and courteous, would you do me a small favor? Would you be so kind as to take off your spectacles? Syme sprang to his feet, stepping backwards a little like a chemical. Excuse me. Would you be so kind as to take off your spectacles? The professor swung round on his seat and stared at Syme with a sort of frozen fury of astonishment. Syme, like a man who has thrown his life and fortune on the table, leaned forward with a fiery face. The doctor did not move. For a few seconds there was a silence in which one could hear a pin drop, split once by the single hoot of a distant steamer on the Times. Then Dr. Bull rose slowly, still smiling, and took off his spectacles. Man, I love moments like that. Sound of the distant steamer. Detail upon detail. Syme sprang to his feet, stepping backwards a little like a chemical lecturer from a successful explosion. His eyes were like stars, and for an instant he could only point without speaking. Man, this guy's really going for it. Good old GK. The professor had also started to his feet, forgetful of his supposed paralysis. He leaned on the back of the chair and stared doubtfully at Dr. Bull as if the doctor had been turned into a toad before his eyes. And indeed, it was almost as great a transformation seen. The two detectives saw sitting in the chair before them a very boyish-looking young man with very frank and happy hazel eyes, an open expression, cockney clothes like those of a city clerk, and an unquestionable breath about him of being very good and rather commonplace. The smile was still there, but it might have been the first smile of a baby. "I knew I was a poet," cried Syme in a sort of ecstasy. "I knew my intuition was infallible as the Pope. It was the spectacles that did it. It was all the spectacles. Given those beastly black eyes and all the rest of him, his health and his jolly looks, made him a live devil among dead ones." "It certainly does make a queer difference," said the professor shakily. "But as regards the project of Dr. Bull..." "Project be damned," roared Syme beside himself. "Look at him. Look at his face. Look at his collar. Look at his blessed boots. You don't suppose, do you, that thing's an anarchist?" "Syme," cried the other in an apprehensive agony. "Why, by God," said Syme, "I'll take the risk of that myself. Dr. Bull, I am a police officer. There's my card," and he flung down the blue card upon the table. The professor still feared that all was lost, but he was loyal. He pulled out his own official card and put it beside his friend's. Then the third man burst out laughing, and for the first time that morning they heard his voice. "I'm awfully glad you chaps have come so early," he said with a sort of schoolboy flippancy, "for we can all start for France together. Yes, I'm in the force right enough." And he flicked a blue card towards them lightly as a matter of form. Clapping a brisk bowler on his head and resuming his goblin glasses, the doctor moved so quickly towards the door that the others instinctively followed him. Syme seemed a little distrait, and as he passed under the doorway, he suddenly struck his stick on the stone passage so that it rang. "But Lord God Almighty," he cried out, "if this is all right, there were more damned detectives than there were damned dynamiters at the damned council." "We might have fought easily," said Bull. "We were 4 against 3. The professor was descending the stairs, but his voice came up from below. "No," said the voice. "We were not 4 against 3. We were not so lucky. We were 4 against 1. The others went down the stairs in silence. The young man called Bull, with an innocent courtesy characteristic of him, insisted on going last until they reached the street, but there his own robust rapidity asserted itself unconsciously, and he walked quickly on ahead towards a railway inquiry office, talking to the others over his shoulder. "It is jolly good to get some pals," he said. "I've been half dead with the jumps, being quite alone. I nearly flung my arms round Gogol and embraced him, which would have been imprudent. I hope you won't despise me for having been in a blue funk." "All the blue devils in blue hell," said Syme, "contributed to my blue funk, but the worst devil was you and your infernal goggles." The young man laughed delightedly. "Wasn't it a rag?" he said. "Such a simple idea, not my own. I haven't got the brains. You see, I wanted to go into the detective service, especially the anti-dynamite business, but for that purpose they wanted someone to dress up as a dynamiter. And they all swore by blazes that I could never look like a dynamiter. They said my very walk was respectable, and that seen from behind I looked like the British Constitution. They said I looked too healthy and too optimistic, and too reliable and benevolent. They called me all sorts of names at Scotland Yard. They said that if I had been a criminal, I might have made my fortune by looking so like an honest man, but as I had the misfortune to be an honest man, there was not even the remotest chance of my assisting them by ever looking like a criminal. I'm going to go back and reread a little bit. They said I looked too healthy and too optimistic and too reliable and benevolent. They called me all sorts of names at Scotland Yard. They said if I had been a criminal, I might have made my fortune by looking so like an honest man. But as I had the misfortune to be an honest man, there was not even the remotest chance of my assisting them by ever looking like a criminal. But at last I was brought before some old josser who was high up in the force and who seemed to have no end of a head on his shoulders. And there the others all talked hopelessly. One asked whether a bushy beard would hide my nice smile. Another said that if they blacked my face, I might look like a Negro anarchist. But this old chap chipped in with a most extraordinary remark. A pair of smoked spectacles will do it, he said positively. Look at him now. He looks like an angelic office boy. Put him on a pair of smoked spectacles, and children will scream at the sight of him. And so it was, by George. When once my eyes were covered, all the rest, smile and big shoulders and short hair, made me look a perfect little devil. As I say, it was simple enough when it was done, like miracles. But that wasn't the really miraculous part of it. There was one really staggering thing about the business, and my head still turns at it. What was that? Asked Syme. I'll tell you, answered the man in spectacles. This big pot in the police who sized me up so that he knew how the goggles would go with my hair and socks. My God, he never saw me at all. Syme's eyes suddenly flashed on him. How was that? He asked. I thought you talked to him. So I did, said Bull brightly. So I did, said Bull brightly, but we talked in a pitch-dark room like a coal cellar. There, you would never have guessed that. I could not have conceived it, said Syme gravely. It is indeed a new idea, said the professor. Their new ally was in practical matters a whirlwind. At the inquiry office, he asked with business-like brevity about the trains for Dover. Having got his information, he bundled the company into a cab and put them and himself inside a railway carriage before they had properly realized the breathless process. They were already on the Calais boat before conversation flowed freely. I had already arranged, he explained, to go to France for my lunch, but I am delighted to have someone to lunch with me. You see, I had to send that beast, the Marquis, over with his bomb, because the president had his eye on me, though God knows how. I'll tell you the story someday. It was perfectly choking. Whenever I tried to slip out of it, I saw the president somewhere, smiling out of the bow window of a club, or taking off his hat to me from the top of an omnibus. I tell you, you can say what you like. That fellow sold himself to the devil. He can be in 6 places at once. So you sent the Marquis off, I understand, asked the professor. Was it long ago? Shall we be in time to catch him? Yes, answered the new guide. I've timed it all. He'll still be at Calais when we arrive. But when do we catch him at Calais? But when we do catch him at Calais, said the professor, what are we going to do? At this question, the countenance of Dr. Bull fell for the first time. He reflected a little and then said, theoretically, I suppose we ought to call the police. No, not I, said Syme. Theoretically, I ought to drown myself first. I promised a poor fellow who was a real modern pessimist on my word of honor not to tell the police. I'm no hand at casuistry, but I can't break my word to a modern pessimist. It's like breaking one's word to a child. I'm in the same boat, said the professor. I tried to tell the police and I couldn't because of some silly oath I took. You see, when I was an actor, I was a sort of all-round beast. Perjury or treason is the only crime I haven't committed. If I did that, I shouldn't know the difference between right and wrong. I've been through all that, said Dr. Bull, and I've made up my mind. I gave my promise to the secretary. You know him, man who smiles upside down. My friends, that man is the most utterly unhappy man that was ever human. It may be his digestion or his conscience or his nerves or his philosophy of the universe, but he's damned. He's in hell. Well, I can't turn on a man like that and hunt him down. It's like whipping a leper. I may be mad, but that's how I feel, and there's jolly well the end of it. I don't think you're mad, said Syme. I knew you would decide like that when first you... said Dr. Bull. When first you took off your spectacles. Dr. Bull smiled a little and strolled across the deck to look at the sunlit sea. Then he strolled back again, kicking his heels carelessly, and a companionable silence fell between the 3 men. Well, said Syme, Seems that we have all the same kind of morality or immorality, so we had better face the fact that comes of it. Yes, assented the professor, you're quite right, and we must hurry up, for I can see the gray nose standing out from France. The fact that comes of it, said Syme seriously, is this, that we three are alone on this planet. Gogol has gone. God knows where. Perhaps the president has smashed him like a fly. On the council, we are 3 men against 3, like the Romans who held the bridge. But we are worse off than that, first because they can appeal to their organization and we cannot appeal to ours. And second, because one of those other 3 men, said the professor, is not a man. Syme nodded and was silent for a second or two. Then he said, my idea is this. We must do something to keep the Marquis in Calais till tomorrow midday. I have turned over 20 schemes in my head. We cannot denounce him as a dynamiter. That is agreed. We cannot get him detained on some trivial charge, for we should have to appear. He knows us and he would smell a rat. We cannot pretend to keep him on anarchist business. He might swallow much in that way, but not the notion of stopping in Calais while the Tsar went safely through Paris. We might try to kidnap him and lock him up ourselves, but he is a well-known man here. He has a whole bodyguard of friends. He is very strong and brave, and the event is doubtful. The only thing I concede to do is actually to take advantage of the very things that are in the Marquis's favor. I'm going to profit by the fact that he is a highly respected nobleman. I'm going to profit by the fact that he has many friends and moves in the best society. What the devil are you talking about? Asked the professor. The Symes are first mentioned in the 14th century, said Syme. But there is a tradition that one of them rode behind Bruce at Bannockburn. Since 1350, the tree is quite clear. He's gone off his head, said the little doctor, staring. Our bearings, continued Syme calmly, are argent a Sevron gules charged with 3 crosslets of the field. The motto varies. The professor seized Syme roughly by the waistcoat. We are just inshore, he said. Are you seasick or joking in the wrong place? My remarks are almost painfully practical, answered Syme in an unhurried manner. The house of St. Eustache also is very ancient. The Marquis cannot deny that he is a gentleman. He cannot deny that I am a gentleman. And in order to put the matter of my social position quite beyond a doubt, I propose at the earliest opportunity to knock his hat off. But here we are in the harbor. They went on shore under the strong sun in a sort of daze. Syme, who had now taken the lead as Bull had taken it in London, led them along a kind of marine parade until he came to some cafes, embowered in a bulk of greenery and overlooking the sea. As he went before them, his step was slightly swaggering, and he swung his stick like a sword. He was making apparently for the extreme end of the line of cafes, but he stopped abruptly. With a sharp gesture, he motioned them to silence, but he pointed with one gloved finger to a cafe table under a bank of flowering foliage, at which sat the Marquis de St. Eustache, his teeth shining in his thick black beard, and his bold brown face shadowed by a light yellow straw hat and outlined against the violet sea. Oh, man. I love the poetry of, as he went before them, his step was slightly swaggering, and he swung his stick like a sword. Chapter 10, The Duel. Syme sat down at a cafe table with his companions, his blue eyes sparkling like the bright sea below. And ordered a bottle of Saumur with a pleased impatience. He was for some reason in a condition of curious hilarity. His spirits were already unnaturally high. They rose as the Saumur sank, and in half an hour his talk was a torrent of nonsense. He professed to be making out a plan of the conversation which was going to ensue between himself and the deadly Marquis. He jotted it down wildly with pencil. It was arranged like a printed catechism, with questions and answers, and was delivered with an extraordinary rapidity of utterance. I shall approach. Before taking off his hat, I shall take off my own. I shall say, the Marquis de St. Eustache, I believe. He will say, the celebrated Mr. Syme, I presume. He will say in the most exquisite French, how are you? I shall reply in the most exquisite Cockney, ah, just the Syme. Oh, shut it, said the man in spectacles. Pull yourself together and chuck away that bit of paper. What are you really going to do? But it was a lovely catechism, said Syme pathetically. Do let me read it to you. It has only 43 questions and answers, and some of the Marquise's answers are wonderfully witty. I like to be just to my enemy. But what's the good of it all? Asked Dr. Bull in exasperation. It leads up to my challenge, don't you see? Said Syme, beaming. When the Marquise has given the 39th reply, which runs, has it by any chance occurred to you, asked the professor with a ponderous simplicity, that the Marquise may not say all the 43 things you have put down for him? In that case, I understand, your own epigrams may appear somewhat more forced. Syme struck the table with a radiant face. Why, how true that is, he said. And I never thought of it. Sir, you have an intellect beyond the common. You will make a name. Ah, you're as drunk as an owl, said the doctor. It only remains, continued Syme, quite unperturbed, to adopt some other method of breaking the ice, if I may so express it, between myself and the man I wish to kill. And since the course of a dialogue cannot be predicted by one of its parties alone, as you have pointed out with such recondite acumen, the only thing to be done, I suppose, is for the one party, as far as possible, to do all the dialogue by himself. And so I will. By George. And he stood up suddenly, his yellow hair blowing in the slight sea breeze.